Hi! This is now the third time I've tried to record the same video because Google and YouTube have not been my friends today. But here I am now. You'll notice it's not Wednesday. This is Words Day, Thursday, because it's been kind of a long week and I have been struggling through this guy still. Turns out Robert Lowell has an Elizabeth Bishop problem where, his beginning poems are just, they're really long. They're still trying to break out of that formalist tradition. And a lot of them are metered. So there's this meter is like this very specific rhythm and syllable count that a poem has to fall into. And they're just, it's just it became a very rote way of writing poetry, R-O-T-E, a very standardized way, which is really not what you want from your poetry, and can also, for me at least, sort of take away from what the writer can do creatively. Because while you can do a lot content-wise, you have to stay in the same bucket. It's like there's only so much you can create in one bucket. It's like if you're making a cocktail, but you can only do it in one. If you told a really good bartender they could only make cocktails in a tumbler glass for the rest of their lives, they would a really good bartender would be like, well, what, a martini glass? What about some drinks are better in those long, tall things, which I don't know the name of. The mojitos come in sometimes. Anyway, it gives you just a lot more variety. And in poetry, there's 9 million zillion different kinds of glasses you can use because they're your words and you can structure them any way you want to. I don't know if any of that made sense, but this is my third time recording this, so bear with me. So I'm going to be reading Skunk Hour, which he wrote for Elizabeth Bishop to continue the intermingling theme of Elizabeth Bishop and Robert Lowell. And this is one of his most famous poems and a really incredible example of how he marries external landscape and an inner panic in a way that is incredibly relatable, and also definitely has those moments where you see a little rhyme, there'll be a couplet here and there that rhyme, and then it's back to more conversational language, and he sort of jumps back and forth between those two things in a way that works, that often in other poems, earlier poems, that when he jumps back and forth between them, it just feels kind of clunky. You're like, whoa, okay, am I reading a metered poem, or am I reading a free-flowing poem? What's going on? And something I have been enjoying, though, even in the poems that are a little more, I guess, hard to get through for me, is his very autobiographical style. I feel like I'm kind of reading his biography. He was known for being one of the proponents and progenitors of the confessional style. So ripped from the headlines, sort of Law and Order SVU, ripped from the headlines, but the headlines of his own life, writing about those things very intimately. And I think, all writers, all poets, in some sense they definitely pull from their own emotional landscapes, but in some sense do pull from their lives, right? But he was one of the first people to do it in a very detailed way, in a very direct way. And, often got in trouble for it. Elizabeth Bishop and him actually had a falling out about that because she thought it was pretty cruel that he was publishing poems that included snippets of letters that him and his ex-wife had written back and forth. And she thought that was kind of going over the line, which is up for debate. But he was known for that. And I really love it. And some of the poets that initially got me into poetry were Sharon Olds, who's a more contemporary poet, but she's confessional. I mean, she's a couple generations later. And I think that he has some incredible, incredible poems, but I think in a big way, a lot of people came after him sort of perfected that confessional style. Although I will say, I'm not saying that his poems aren't awesome. I'm just saying that I think he spent a lot of time struggling out of the more formalist tradition. Apparently, he brought his poems to Robert Frost at one point, and Robert Frost was like, "This is earlier in his career," and Robert Frost was like, "So like these are kind of long. Could we just like cut this part?" Because Robert Frost is known for his precision of language and economy with language, and just like there's no word there that does not matter. I think Robert Lowell struggled with that, but ultimately when he hits it, just like Elizabeth Bishop, he hits it. So, I will shut up now and read this poem. It's called Skunk Hour for Elizabeth Bishop. Nautilus Island's hermit heiress still lives through winter in her Spartan cottage. Her sheep still graze above the sea. Her son's a bishop. Her farmer is first selectman in our village. She's in her dotage. Thirsting for the hierarchic privacy of Queen Victoria's century, she buys up all the eyesores facing her shore and lets them fall. The season's ill. We've lost our summer millionaire, who seemed to leap from an L.L. Bean catalog. His 9-knot yawl was auctioned off to lobstermen. A red fox stain covers Blue Hill. And now our fairy decorator brightens his shop for fall. His fishnets filled with orange cork, orange his cobbler's bench and all. There is no money in his work. He'd rather marry. One dark night, my two-door Ford climbed the hill's skull. I watched for love cars. Lights turned down. They lay together, hull to hull, where the graveyard shelves on the town. My mind's not right. A car radio bleats. Love, oh careless love. I hear my ill spirit sob in each blood cell as if my hand were at its throat. I myself am hell. Nobody's here. Only skunks that search in the moonlight for a bite to eat. They march on their souls up Main Street. White stripes, moonstruck eyes, red fire, under the chalk-dry and spire of the Trinitarian Church. I stand on top of our back steps and breathe the rich air. A mother skunk with her column of kittens swills the garbage pail. She jabs her wedge head in a cup of sour cream, drops her ostrich tail, and will not scare. So I think there's, in that final couple lines, and will not scare, like resentment towards the skunk almost, that the skunk is not scared and is just an animal, a being that goes about its life and doesn't feel these sort of spiraling, doubts and fears and symptoms of mental anguish, and pretty straightforward, like looking for that garbage, trying to feed its young. And then also a little admiration, too, for that. I think there's that tension in those last lines, and I think in the entirety of this poem, there's a lot of tension between, a community, this Nautilus Island hermit heiress who's, alone, but still is part of the community that he knows, and then this summer millionaire who seemed to leap from an Ella Bean catalog, who's gone now, and this decorator who's branding his shop for fall. So, like, everyone's in their own little worlds, encapsulated in their own little worlds. So they probably all, know each other in this town, in this community, but they remain separate. And I think that's no accident that he spends, most of the poem kind of setting these pieces into place. There's also a lot of color in the poem, which I didn't notice until I read it a couple times. Like, a red fox stain covers Blue Hill. His fishnets filled with orange cork, orange his cobbler's bench and all. The red fire of the eyes of the skunk, the black and white of the white stripes. I think it's a very kind of crisp, vivid vivid way that he brings color into the narrative. And I think it's interesting that towards the beginning of the poem, the colors are more they're brighter. They're more technicolor. And as we go on, they become more like dangerous and dark, like black, white, red, and all in kind of mirroring his own mental breakdown. But I think what he does so beautifully here is echo how we all think, which is, just he's describing the love cars, the lights turned down, and everything he sees, and then all of a sudden he says, my mind's not right. Like you'd be following a train of thought, and then you're like, no, that's, or you'll just be thinking about anything in your life, and then all of a sudden a really startling thought, like one sentence will come into your head, like maybe in a difficult time that you're going through, and it'll either be a message of hope or it'll be a message of like just clarity. You get clarity. And I think so this poem is a poem about like exploring this lonely and yet full territory that he's both mentally and physically inhabiting. And it also takes place, I think, in Blue Hill, which is really close to our place in Deer Isle. So that, of course, always pulls on the old heartstrings. So that's my spiel for this week. I'm sorry if I talked, but that's what I'm here for. Next week, I hope to be done with this book, and if not, you'll be subjected to more Robert Lowell. Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And go read some poems. Bye.